What's up guys, it's Matt with the YouTube channel Bleepin' Jeep. Today I want to show you 13 different ways to cut metal. I'll also show you when and why I use those techniques. If you haven't been here before, make sure to hit the subscribe button. We have 3 different videos every week. We have all the best off-road and how-to videos on the interweb. None of the boring stuff. Let's get started. Who's ready to cut some metal? I am ready. Oh! Okay, let's start off with something simple. These are tin snips and they are designed to cut thin sheet metal. This is what used to be a filing cabinet, so you can imagine how thin that is. Now they make different types. This one is designed to cut straight. They also make ones that are designed to cut clockwise and counterclockwise. So with a set of tin snips, you can make a nice straight cut, or you can make some pretty delicate curves. For what I do, I rarely use the tin snips unless I'm cutting some sheet metal and I just don't want to get my other tools out. But if you're cutting sheet metal a lot, this is one that you definitely need to have in your toolkit. Okay, this next one is probably the most used tool in my whole inventory, and that is an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel on it. So this one gets used a lot, particularly because you can switch out the cutting wheel for a flat disc or a grinding wheel. But with these, you can make cuts on just about anything. You can use this to cut thin, thick, whatever you want. I use it a lot for cutting tube, just for cutting quick pieces of flat steel. You can use it for cutting aluminum, pretty much anything. As with all these tools though, you want to make sure that you're wearing your safety gear for this one because it can be particularly dangerous. It spins very quickly. So for these cutoff wheels, make sure you don't buy the cheap ones. You want to buy the good ones on these. So in the description below, I'll leave a link to the ones that I use, and I'll also leave links to all these other tools if you're interested in those. Okay, here's one that I use pretty much every day when I'm fabricating something. It's called a horizontal bandsaw. You can also make it into a vertical bandsaw. You just attach this plate right here, and now it's a vertical bandsaw. But take this off, you lean this down, and it's a horizontal bandsaw. So I use this a lot for cutting tube. Now a lot of people will ask me, why do I use my angle grinder for cutting tube? Well, I tend to buy my tubes in about 20-foot lengths. So if you can imagine a 20-foot length of tube hanging off the end of this, it's pretty hard to do. So if something is though under like 6 feet, then I'll bring it over here to the horizontal bandsaw because this clamp will hold it much easier than a 20-foot length sticking off. But it's also great for cutting flat stock, and this little piece right here is great if you want to have multiple pieces. Let's say you wanted 20 of something that was the same length. You set up this stop, you put your piece in here, you slide it forward till it hits that stop, and you tighten this down, and now you can make 20 exact replicas. So that's the other great thing about this machine, is that when it finishes the cut, it turns itself off. So if I'm cutting something really thick, I can just set it in there and go do something else while it's cutting. I should also mention that they make a portable one of these, a portable bandsaw, and it's pretty much just this piece right here. It comes in a smaller package about this big. You've probably seen one, and that way if you're working on something big like an axle, you can take that and use it where you need it. You wouldn't be able to necessarily put an axle over here, but you'd be able to take that portable bandsaw and just hold it up to it and cut through. Okay, next up is the chop saw. Now this is pretty much just an angle grinder on steroids. It's got an abrasive wheel and it spins really fast. The thing I don't like about this is that it throws sparks like crazy out the other end. But it is good for cutting tube, and you could cut something like a 2x2 with it. Now I haven't used this. I rarely ever use it after I bought my horizontal bandsaw. The good thing about it is it's only about $100, whereas the horizontal bandsaw was about $300. So if you're on a budget, this might be what you get. Although I found this at a garage sale for $18. So, safety gear. I'll show you how it works. So as you can see, it works good, it works fast, but that machine is very scary. Okay, this next tool is really fun to use. This is called an air metal shear. You'll remember I cut out the sheet metal with these, but what if you have a lot to do? Well, that's where this tool comes in handy. So it cuts sheet metal and also thin aluminum, and you can cut in a straight line or you can do corners and turns. Not real tight turns, but just small turns, but it's really fast and really quick. So it does take up about 1/4 inch of metal the way it's designed, but you get these little curly cues, which are kind of fun. Let's do it one more time. So I would use that tool anytime I'm doing long, straight, or semi-straight runs on sheet metal. It's also great for trimming fenders. So I use this on trimming fenders, the front fenders of the Jeep Cherokees. And they're relatively cheap, probably about $30 to $60. Okay, so this next one I don't have, but I still thought it would be worth mentioning. You saw the air shear. They make something called a metal shear. And it's basically just like a giant paper cutter. It's usually a big, huge desk type thing. I think you can also get them for your welding table that mount on the side. But basically all it does is you put your sheet metal in it, and it has a giant blade, and it just comes down and chops your sheet metal. They're huge, and I think the reason that you would use these is if you are doing a lot of sheet metal work and you are buying them in 4x8 sheets and you just need to cut them down. It's a quick, fast way to cut down big sheets of sheet metal. The next tool is an air die grinder. It's pretty much just like a miniature angle grinder. You can put a bunch of different attachments on this, but one of them is the cutoff wheel. Now the benefit of this is you can make sharper turns because it's got a smaller blade on it. I don't use this very often as a cutting tool, but if I were, it's probably going to be cutting the heads off of bolts, or maybe you have a bolt going through something and it's just way too long. You can get this into a tight spot and cut it down. It would also work great for cutting out bad welds or something like that. I use this a lot for cutting tack welds, so whenever I go to weld something together, I'll just make a small tack weld. If it's not in the right spot, for instance, I did it on this, as you can see, and then you just go ahead and grind it out, or just cut it loose with one of these. Now this next tool is the most basic of metal cutting tools, and that is the hacksaw. In fact, I use this so infrequently that I couldn't even find my real hacksaw. This happens to be a mini hacksaw. It wouldn't be my first choice for cutting metal, but it's probably one of the first tools that you'll ever own. When I was a kid, I got one of these, and that was my only option at the time. It takes a lot of muscle and a little bit of time, but you can cut through anything with one of these. It just takes some elbow grease. So the next step up from a hacksaw is a sawzall, and it's basically just a hacksaw with a motor on it. You can put different blades in these. You can have a wood blade. This is a metal blade, and it just moves back and forth and cuts through metal like butter. So this will cut metal thick or thin. It's great because you can get into tight spots with it. You just shove that blade up wherever you need to. It's also great because the blade will bend. So if you're working in a real tight spot, you just stick that up there and the blade will bend like that, and you can still cut whatever you need to. But it also has a battery, so you can take it out. You don't have to have electricity or air. And I use this a lot. Let's say if I'm going to the salvage yard, like you saw the pull apart video, I used it to cut a door off. But I also use it a lot around the shop, just when I need to cut something quick and simple. So you might not think of this as a metal cutting tool, but this is a tube cutter, and it cuts none other than tube. So basically there's a sharp wheel in here. You just open it up, tighten it down, and then you make a rotation, and then you tighten it down some more. You keep doing that all the way around until it cuts through the tube. So this happens to be copper tube, but they also make bigger versions. You can cut anything all the way up to galvanized pipe, steel pipe, and all kinds of things with these. Now the reason you would use a tubing cutter instead of a saw is to get a nice clean edge on the tubing that you're cutting, and then a lot of the nicer ones have a deburring tool that pops out, and you can really clean up the inside of that. Now I typically would use something like this to make brake lines. When you're cutting brake lines, you need a tubing cutter, and that's what I would use something like this for around my shop. The next tool I want to talk about is a metal circular saw. I don't have one, and this is not one, but it's very similar, except it has, the handle is usually on the back here. It has a slower motor than a wood circular saw, and it has a metal blade. So these are generally used to cut sheet steel. You can also cut small tubing, that kind of thing with them. They can cut up to 3/4 of an inch thick, so I could easily cut my welding table in half with one of these. I don't have one, but let me show you what you can do with a regular circular saw. So if all you need to do is cut thin sheet metal, what you can do is take an old scrap blade. If you'll notice, the edges of the blade are thicker than the width of the blade. All we need to do is grind those off so that the entire blade is the same thickness. Okay, once you get the blades flattened out, you should be able to cut thin sheet metal. Of course, it's going to be very loud, and it's going to throw some pieces of metal, so you want to make sure you're wearing ear protection and eye protection. So I've used that a lot for cutting metal roofing. So if you're going to cut anything that's real thin, just thin sheet metal, you can just use your regular saw and either buy a metal blade or make your own like we did there. But if you're going to cut anything thicker, you'll need to pony up and buy the real metal circular saw. But remember, it's only good for straight cuts. It's not like you're going to be doing any curves or anything like that. Okay, the next tool is the oxyacetylene torch. You've probably seen ones that look like this, and then I also have the Cobra, which is a bit smaller and more precise. What these do is mix oxygen and acetylene. So you have to have these tanks, you have a hose, and you have some gauges, and then I'll show you, but you light this sucker on fire, and then you can cut through any thickness of steel. Well, I say any, but usually about up to 1 inch or so. So the great thing about oxyacetylene is that it has multiple purposes. Not only can I use it for cutting metal, but I can also use it for heating. Let's say I have a bolt that's stuck, I can heat it up and get it off a lot easier, but I can also use it for welding and brazing. So let's give this a shot. We'll cut some metal. You can do very precise straight lines with this, but I'm just going to show you how you can cut right through this. This is 1/4 inch. So I haven't used that in a while. I'm kind of out of practice. The pros are that it's very cheap. It's a lot cheaper to get a hold of a set of this. Over time though, it can be expensive because you have to fill up the tanks. The cons is that you do have to have practice. There's a lot more technique to this than something like a plasma cutter. My next tool though, the plasma cutter, blows all of the others out of the water. In fact, after I got this, I haven't used my oxyacetylene torch once to cut steel. So this is a lot more expensive, it's a lot more involved, but it is super cool. One of the things you need to consider when purchasing a plasma cutter is that you need to provide it with a lot of air. So in that case, you're going to need an air compressor, pretty large one. You'll also need to provide it with dry air. So in that case, you need to run a lot of tube and have several water drops. At the end of that, I have this air dryer, and it takes these filters and cartridges and dries the air. And depending on the size of your plasma cutter, you might need to provide it with 220 volts. So the plasma cutter is great for making straight cuts, but also making intricate cuts. It's really easy to use. All you need to do is set up your working clamp. So you put that on the metal. And then if you're going to make a straight cut, you just use a guide. And we're just going to drag this along right next to our guide. The thicker the metal, the slower you go. And this will cut up to about 3/4 of an inch. So right there, the plasma cutter is really smart. It knew I didn't have the air turned on, so it wouldn't let me cut. It'll also make sure that these consumables, they call these consumables, if you don't have those in the right order, it won't turn on as well. Let's see if this works now. So once you're done making your cut, there's a little bit of what they call dross left over on the back side of the cut. You can usually take just a chisel, knock that off. Goes pretty quick, but it leaves a very clean cut. So I use the plasma cutter a lot. The only downside to it though, like I said, is the initial expense, and then it fills the whole place up with smoke. So you need to have like a well ventilated area. Okay, so my camera just bit the dust, so you'll have to make do with this ending from my iPhone. So besides those tools that I showed you already for cutting metal, there's only a few more that I can think of, and that is CNC machines. So CNC machine is basically a computer. It's a big table operated by a computer, and it moves the implement around. So that would be like a plasma cutter. It's kind of like a 3D printer for a plasma cutter. So you have a torch and the computer is just telling it where to go. You can get some amazing cuts. They're really expensive, in excess of $10,000 say. There's also a CNC laser cutter, so you can cut metal with lasers now. And there is a CNC water jet table. So that would be like a water pressure washer, and instead it's much higher pressure, and it's operated by a CNC machine as well. So the water jet can actually punch through super thick steel. Not only that, but they can have them rotate now and make depth cuts and cuts at angles and all kinds of cool stuff. So those things can get super, super expensive, in excess of $500,000, stuff like that. So I'm sure I've missed a few, and if you know of them, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what I missed. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and do subscribe. Tell your friends about us. We have 3 videos a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we have the best off-road content on the interwebs. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time. Piece of junk camera.